The champagne had spilled on her white silk dress when Adelaide tripped on the marble staircase of the estate, and it was precisely at this moment of absolute embarrassment that her eyes met Thaddeus's for the first time. He, a 46-year-old wine magnate, with perfectly combed greying hair and calloused hands that told the story of a life built from nothing among the hills of Sonoma Valley, stood at the top of the staircase like an imposing figure, but his eyes revealed an unexpected gentleness that made her completely forget the stain on her dress. Sometimes our greatest humiliations open the door to our greatest joys, she thought, while awkwardly trying to blot the golden liquid that was soaking into the precious fabric. Adelaide, at 21, was a librarian in the small town of Healdsburg and had been invited to this charity gala by pure coincidence. Her aunt, the estate's housekeeper for decades, had fallen ill, and she had to take her place for this special evening. Her hands trembled not only from nervousness, but also from the sensation of being completely out of her element, surrounded by baccarat crystal, paintings that cost more than her entire house, and people whose shoes were worth 6 months of her salary. "Let me help you," murmured a deep voice near her ear. She looked up to discover Thaddeus Montgomery himself, holding out a white linen napkin to her. The contact between their fingers was brief but electrifying. Time seemed to suspend itself in that grand hall, where the light from crystal chandeliers reflected in 1,000 sparkles on the walls, adorned with antique wood paneling. "I'm Thaddeus," he said simply, as if his name didn't grace the labels of the region's most prestigious wine bottles. "Adelaide Clark," she replied, her voice barely audible beneath the elegant murmur of the reception. I'm filling in for my aunt tonight. I shouldn't be here." He smiled, and that smile transformed his austere face into something much more accessible, almost vulnerable. "In that case, we're both feeling like imposters." His gaze swept the room. "I've been hosting these evenings for 20 years, and I still feel as if I might be unmasked at any moment." What Adelaide didn't know was that Thaddeus had closed himself off to love for the past 15 years, building impenetrable emotional walls after his wife had abandoned him, taking with her not only half his fortune, but also the confidence that someone could love him for who he truly was, not for what he possessed. The evening passed like a waking dream. While the richly attired guests wandered with their champagne flutes, Thaddeus and Adelaide found themselves, as if by magic, conversing in a secluded corner of the terrace, under a starry sky that seemed to have been orchestrated especially for them. The heady scent of climbing roses mingled with the cool evening air, creating an almost unreal atmosphere. "Books are my best friends," she confided in response to a question about her passion for literature. "They never judge you. They take you elsewhere when reality becomes too heavy." "And what weighs heavily in your reality, Miss Clark?" he asked, genuinely curious. She hesitated, weighing her words. Mediocrity, perhaps. The fear of living an ordinary, predictable life. Her eyes shone with a light that Thaddeus hadn't seen in a long time, the spark of someone who still dreams, who still believes in the infinite possibilities of existence. When he escorted her to the small service door through which she had arrived, something had changed in the universe. An invisible door had opened, and neither of them yet knew where this passage would lead them. 3 days after the party, Thaddeus appeared at the library where Adelaide worked. The small bell suspended above the door chimed softly, announcing his entrance. The few readers present in the small-town library looked up, then quickly lowered their heads, but not quickly enough to hide their surprise at recognizing the famous winemaker. Adelaide was perched on a wooden stepladder, shelving books on the upper shelves. The golden light filtering through the stained-glass windows created a halo around her silhouette, giving the scene an almost painterly quality. "I'm looking for a rare book on the old Victorian houses of Sonoma County," he announced, even though his true intention was simply to see if she would smile in that delicate way that had enchanted him that night. She descended the ladder cautiously, smoothing her simple skirt. "Mr. Montgomery," she said, her face betraying her surprise. "I wasn't expecting to. We do indeed have some books on that subject." "Please follow me." The small-town library, located in a 19th-century building with time-worn chestnut wood shelves and the unmistakable smell of old books, mingled with the jasmine scent that Adelaide sprayed every day, became the unlikely setting for a courtship that defied all the social conventions of this historic Californian town. "You seem to know each book personally," he observed as she ran her fingertips over the leather bindings, searching for the requested volume. "It's almost the case," she admitted with a shy smile. "Some of these books are like old friends. They know me in my moments of joy and sadness." "And what makes you sad, Adelaide?" The question was direct, almost bold. She paused, surprised by this sudden familiarity. "The same things that sadden everyone, I suppose. Loneliness, uncertainty." She paused, then added in a whisper, "The feeling of being invisible." Thaddeus moved closer, reducing the space between them. "You are anything but invisible." In his eyes she saw something that deeply troubled her, a recognition as if he had perceived a part of her that she believed well hidden. And for the first time in a long time, Thaddeus felt the walls he had erected around his heart tremble slightly. Thaddeus's visits became regular. Always under the pretext of historical or literary research, he spent hours conversing with her in the quiet corners of the library. Sometimes they hardly spoke, simply enjoying each other's presence in a comfortable silence, punctuated only by the rustling of turned pages. "Why me?" she asked one day, as twilight enveloped the library in its orange light. "You could have any woman from your world." He considered her question for a long moment. "Perhaps because you don't pretend. In a world where everyone wears a mask, your authenticity is refreshing." What he didn't say was that every time he looked at her, he saw not only the woman she was, but also the person he might have been if he hadn't let bitterness sculpt his soul for so many years. The rumors began as a discreet stream, then transformed into a torrent. In the small town of Healdsburg, where the stones themselves seemed to listen and whisper, the budding relationship between Adelaide and Thaddeus became the subject of every conversation. At the farmer's market in the town square, between the colourful stalls of fruits and vegetables, glances lingered on Adelaide when she did her shopping. The vendors, who had known her since childhood, had changed their attitude. Some were curious, others openly hostile. "They say you're a gold digger," confided Olivia, her only friend who still dared to speak frankly to her, as they sat at a table at the town square cafe. "That you're after his money." The spring sun bathed the Victorian square, highlighting the ochre and honey tones of the historic facades, creating a striking contrast with the shadow that crossed Adelaide's face. "How can they think that?" she murmured, hurt. "I've never asked him for anything." "It's Healdsburg, my dear. People need drama to brighten their daily lives, and a young librarian who turns the head of the famous Thaddeus Montgomery. It's the best soap opera they've had in years." That evening, in the small apartment she rented above Reed's Bakery, Adelaide shed bitter tears. The smell of fresh bread rising through the floorboards, usually comforting, failed to soothe her grief. Her phone vibrated. A message from Thaddeus. "People often talk about what they don't understand. Don't let them define our story." She stared at the screen, wondering how he had intuited her distress. This ability he had to perceive her emotions, even at a distance, both fascinated and frightened her. The next day, as she left the library, she found Thaddeus waiting for her, leaning against his car. He wore a dark suit that contrasted with the simplicity of her outfit. "Come," he said simply. "I have an idea." He took her to the Healdsburg Inn, the most prestigious establishment in town, and invited her to dinner at the gourmet restaurant. The other patrons observed them without discretion, and Adelaide felt like a zoo animal. "Why here?" she whispered, uncomfortable. "Everyone is looking at us." "Exactly," he replied, his eyes shining with quiet determination. "Let's give them something to see. If we hide, we feed their imagination. If we show ourselves, we control the narrative." That evening marked a turning point. Instead of fleeing the glances, they confronted them. Thaddeus took her to cultural events in the region, invited her to accompany him to tastings at his vineyards, gradually introduced her to his world. However, with each step they took together, Adelaide felt the gap that separated them. It wasn't so much their age difference as their fundamentally different worlds. She belonged to the narrow, winding streets of Healdsburg, to simple conversations over coffee, to dusty books and modest dreams. He came from a universe of charity galas, financial decisions involving millions, private jets and constant social obligations. Could she ever truly integrate into this world without losing herself? Thaddeus stood in front of the window of his study, contemplating the perfectly aligned rows of vines that stretched as far as the eye could see. The sun was setting, tinting the landscape with a copper light that transformed the vine leaves into scales of gold. "Sir, the contracts are ready to be signed," announced Harrison, his assistant of more than 20 years. Thaddeus didn't turn around immediately. "Harrison, do you believe one can truly know a person's intentions?" The old man placed the documents on the massive mahogany desk and approached his employer. "If you're referring to Miss Clark, allow me to say that she has nothing in common with Vivian." His ex-wife's name floated in the air like a malevolent ghost. Thaddeus stiffened. "I didn't mention Adelaide." "You didn't need to." Harrison smiled with a familiarity that only decades of loyalty permitted. "You're smiling again, sir. It's been a long time." Left alone, Thaddeus took out a small midnight blue velvet box from his drawer. He opened it, revealing an antique ring set with a sapphire surrounded by small diamonds, a family heirloom that had been waiting for generations to find its place on the finger of a woman worthy of wearing it. "Am I losing my mind?" he murmured to himself. "She's 25 years younger than me." His phone rang, Adelaide's number appearing on the screen. He hesitated before answering, as if each conversation with her brought him closer to a precipice that he both feared and desired. "Good evening, Adelaide." "Thaddeus." Her voice seemed tense. "I think we need to talk." He had heard these words before. Vivian had spoken them just before announcing she was leaving him for a younger man. His heart tightened. "I'm listening." "Not over the phone. Could we meet tomorrow?" "Of course. I'll pick you up after work." The night was long, populated with doubts and questions without answers. Insomnia, his old companion, returned to haunt him. He paced the silent corridors of his mansion, each step resonating on the cold marble, each ancestral portrait seeming to judge him from its gilded frame. At dawn, exhausted but unable to find sleep, he went to his vineyard and walked among the rows, the ground damp with dew beneath his feet. Working the land had always been his refuge, his therapy. His hands, accustomed to official documents and business handshakes, rediscovered their primitive strength in contact with the vines. When Adelaide saw him that evening, she was struck by the dark circles under his eyes and the visible tension in his posture. "You haven't slept," she observed as they walked along the Russian River, its peaceful waters reflecting the twilight sky. "I was afraid of what you were going to tell me." She stopped, surprised. "You thought I was going to break up with you? Isn't that what women do when they say we need to talk?" A sad smile formed on her lips. "I wanted to talk to you about what people are saying, the rumors. The fact that even my mother thinks I'm with you for your money." They sat on a bench facing the river. The last rays of the sun drew golden arabesques on the water. "And does it matter to you what they think?" he asked softly. "It should be simple to say no, but it's my town, the people I've known all my life." She hesitated. "And you? Does it matter to you?" He took her hand, feeling her soft skin against his, rough from work and marked by time. "What matters to me is that you never stay with me for the wrong reasons. I can bear the rumors, the looks, the judgments, but if one day you stay out of obligation, out of habit or self-interest—" "I'm not Vivian," she said firmly, surprising him with this direct mention of his ex-wife. "How do you know her name?" "People talk, Thaddeus. They tell how she left you, how she took half your fortune. They wonder if you're with me because I'm too young and naive to do the same to you." The twilight darkened around them, like a curtain closing on a scene too intimate to be exposed to the light. "I'm with you because you remind me what it's like to be alive," he finally confessed. "Because after years of feeling like a ghost in my own existence, I see myself again in your eyes." She rested her head against his shoulder, and for the first time since the beginning of their relationship, Thaddeus felt they had crossed an invisible boundary together, passing from the uncertain territory of possibilities to the more concrete but equally frightening one of true commitments. "My father was a blacksmith," revealed Thaddeus one summer morning as they ate breakfast on the estate's terrace, overlooking the undulating vineyards. The sky was such an intense blue it seemed almost unreal, and a light breeze made the white linen tablecloths dance. Adelaide looked up from her plate, surprised. "I thought you were born into this world." "All this." Her gesture encompassed the luxurious property, the perfectly maintained gardens, the discreet staff who attended to their comfort. A melancholy smile formed on Thaddeus's lips. "I grew up in a simple house in Healdsburg, on Oak Street. My father forged tools for farmers and sometimes decorative objects for tourists. My mother sold homemade jams at the market. This revelation changed everything. Suddenly Adelaide understood why, despite his fortune, he sometimes seemed uncomfortable at society gatherings, why his hands bore calluses no businessman should have, why he knew the names of local craftsmen and addressed the estate staff with genuine respect. "How did you go from there to all this?" she asked, genuinely curious. "Work, luck, stubbornness." He paused, his gaze lost in the distance. "And many sacrifices." That day he took her to the old town of Healdsburg, but not as a tourist or a wealthy owner coming to shop. He guided her through the streets he had known since childhood, showing her the small house where he had grown up, now transformed into a souvenir shop. His father's forge, now a gourmet restaurant, the school where he had learned to read, the street corner where he had kissed a girl for the first time. The discovery that they shared the same childhood memories, Reed's cinnamon rolls, the 4th of July parades winding up the steep streets, the aroma of barbecue wafting from family restaurants at 2 in the afternoon, created an unexpected connection that transcended social differences. "See that fountain?" he said, pointing to a stone structure in the middle of a small shaded plaza. "I threw hundreds of coins in there making the same wish." "Which was?" "To leave Healdsburg. To be somebody." He laughed softly, a laugh tinged with irony. "And now I'd give anything to recapture the simplicity of those days." It was at that precise moment, in that sun-drenched town, that Adelaide made her decision, not under the effect of a blinding passion or a calculated interest, but in the deep recognition of a soul that, despite appearances, spoke the same language as her own. The next day, she handed in her resignation letter at the town library. The director, Mrs. Bennett, read it with an inscrutable expression. "Are you sure about this, my dear?" she asked, her glasses perched on the tip of her nose. "Once you leave this world for his, it will be difficult to come back." Adelaide thought of the books that had been her faithful companions all these years, of the regular readers she knew by first name, of the modest but real security this job provided her. "I'm not leaving one world for another," she replied with an assurance that surprised herself. "I'm creating a new world with him." When she announced her decision to Thaddeus, he stared at her for a long time, as if trying to read into the depths of her soul. "I never asked you to give up your life for me." "I'm not doing it for you," she affirmed. "I'm doing it for us, for what we could build together." That night in the private library of the estate, a room he had specially arranged for her, with 18th-century wood paneling, cordovan leather armchairs, and a fireplace, he made love to her for the first time. The crackling fire cast dancing shadows on their entwined bodies, and the old books seemed to be silent witnesses to a union that went beyond simple physical desire. "I love you," he murmured against her skin, the words escaping him as if they had been held prisoner for too long. She felt tears streaming down her cheeks, not of sadness, but of that complex emotion born when one finds oneself exactly where one should be, with exactly the person one should be with, at precisely the moment one should be there. Callum Montgomery's arrival at the estate was announced by the screeching of his Porsche tires on the gravel of the main driveway. Adelaide, who was reading quietly on the terrace, felt an unpleasant shiver run down her spine at the sight of this man she had never met but of whom she had heard so much. Thaddeus's younger brother descended from the car, with the ease of a man accustomed to the world adapting to him, rather than vice versa. Tall, elegant, with the same grey eyes as Thaddeus but devoid of their warmth, he climbed the porch steps with a determined step. "So you're my brother's new conquest," he said without preamble, his eyes evaluating Adelaide as one would examine a horse at auction. She stood up, refusing to be intimidated. "My name is Adelaide Clark, and you must be Callum, corporate lawyer, partner at Montgomery & Associates in San Francisco, and holder of 20% of the winery's shares." He smiled without warmth. "Just to make things clear from the start." Thaddeus appeared at that moment, his face hardening at the sight of his brother. "Callum, you could have warned me of your visit, and missed the chance to meet your librarian." The last word was pronounced with a slight mocking inflection. News travels fast, even to San Francisco. Dinner that evening was a diplomatic ordeal worthy of the greatest European courts. Seated in the formal dining room of the estate, under the stern gaze of Montgomery family portraits, Adelaide had to navigate between Callum's acid remarks and seemingly innocent questions, carefully calibrated to destabilize her. "So, Adelaide, Tell me, have you ever thought about what you would do if you and Thaddeus separated? Asked Callum, delicately cutting his Wagyu beef. Financially, I mean. She put down her fork, feeling Thaddeus's gaze weigh on her. I would go back to my job at the library, I suppose, or find another one. Really? Callum seemed genuinely surprised. You wouldn't ask for compensation for your invested time? Callum, enough, Thaddeus intervened, his voice dangerously calm. I'm just asking practical questions, brother. After all, the last time you let your heart govern your head, it cost us nearly $20 million. The tension was palpable. The air seemed to crackle with restrained electricity. Adelaide felt a knot in her throat. So this was how Thaddeus's family saw her, as a potential financial predator, an opportunist waiting for her moment. I don't need compensation for loving someone, she finally said, her voice firmer than she would have believed possible. Love is not an investment with an expected return. A silence fell over the table. Even the butler serving the wine seemed to hold his breath. Callum stared at her for a long moment, then burst into a laugh that almost resembled a bark. She's extraordinary, Thad. Really. Either she's the best actress I've ever met, or she's sincere. And in that case, I worry for her naivety. Later that night, as Thaddeus slept beside her, Adelaide remained awake, contemplating the shadows dancing on the ceiling. Callum's visit had brought up doubts she thought she had overcome. Was she really in her place in this world? Would she ever be accepted by Thaddeus's family, by his social circle, by the people who mattered in his life? The next morning, looking for a pen in Thaddeus's study to leave a message before going shopping in town, she came across a pile of documents. Her name appeared on them as well as her mother's. They were payment receipts addressed to the Sonoma Valley Hospital, covering the entirety of her mother's heart surgery medical expenses, a sum that would have represented decades of repayment for their family. With trembling hands, she sat heavily in the leather chair. Thaddeus had settled their medical debts without ever mentioning it, without seeking to use it as proof of generosity or as a means to bind her to him. When he returned that evening, she was waiting for him in the study, the documents placed in front of her. Why didn't you tell me anything? She asked simply. He approached slowly, his face reflecting a vulnerability he rarely showed. Because I didn't want you to feel indebted. Money is the easiest thing to give, Adelaide. It's not a gift, just a tool. She stood up and approached him, placing a hand on his cheek rough with stubble. You really see me, don't you? You see what I need even before I know it. I try, he murmured. Every day I try to deserve what you offer me. That night, their love took on a new dimension, no longer just the passion of two bodies discovering each other, but the deep communion of two souls, recognizing and accepting each other in their most naked truth. The coastal Oregon house stood proudly on a cliff overlooking the Pacific, its ochre walls standing out against the deep blue of the sea. Century-old pines surrounded the property, their silver-green needles rustling gently in the marine breeze. Adelaide contemplated the landscape from the terrace, her eyes marveling at the immensity of the horizon. She had never traveled beyond the borders of California, and this first escape from her native region took on the appearance of an extraordinary adventure. It's as if the sky and the sea were playing at blending together, she murmured, more to herself than to Thaddeus, who had just joined her, 2 glasses of local white wine in hand. That's why I love this place so much, he said, handing her a glass. Here, the boundaries fade away. You can't quite tell where the earth ends and the sky begins, like their own boundaries that had gradually erased over the past few months. Since the confrontation with Callum and the discovery of Thaddeus's secret generosity, their relationship had acquired a new depth. Adelaide had permanently moved into the estate, learning day by day to navigate this world of privilege and responsibility that was now also hers. Tomorrow I'll take you to a small fishing village I discovered years ago, promised Thaddeus, his arm encircling her slender waist. Tourists don't know about it. Time seems to have stopped there. She rested her head against his shoulder, savoring the warmth of his body against hers. Sometimes I feel like I'm in a dream I don't want to wake up from. It's not a dream, my love. It's our life. That night, lying on the 4-poster bed in the master bedroom, the windows wide open to the starry night, with the gentle sound of waves filling the air and the aroma of wild rosemary carried by the night breeze, Thaddeus whispered words that would mark a turning point in their existence. I'm taking my time, he said, his gentle hands touching Adelaide's face as if she were made of the most fragile porcelain, his eyes reflecting not only desire, but a deep love that frightened him with its intensity. Adelaide, who had kept her purity as a precious treasure, discovered that giving herself to love did not mean losing something but gaining a fullness she had never imagined could exist. Their bodies discovered each other with a tenderness mixed with passion, each caress a promise, each kiss a silent vow. In this Oregon house isolated from the world, they created their own universe, where only their intertwined breaths and the synchronized beating of their hearts existed. At dawn, while Adelaide still slept, her naked body barely covered by a linen sheet, Thaddeus contemplated her serene face. A lock of auburn hair crossed her cheek, and he gently moved it aside, as one would handle an infinitely precious object. When she opened her eyes, he was already dressed, sitting on the edge of the bed with an indecipherable expression. "Good morning," she murmured in a still sleepy voice, a smile stretching her lips at the memory of their night. "I've cancelled all my business appointments for the next month," he announced without preamble. She sat up, the sheet pressed against her chest, surprised by this unexpected declaration. "You did what?" "I postponed all the negotiations, tastings, appointments with distributors. Everything. For a man who hadn't taken a vacation in 15 years, who checked his emails at all hours of the day and night, who participated in conference calls even during their dinners, this decision almost equated to a personal revolution." "Why?" she asked simply. He took her hand, tracing the contours of her palm with his thumb. "Because what we're building is more important than everything else. I want to be present, fully present, for every moment." That month in Oregon became an enchanted parenthesis in their story. They explored secret coves accessible only by boat, dined in family restaurants where grandmothers still cooked as they had in the last century, spent hours talking under the stars, making love to the sound of waves, discovering every corner of their bodies and souls. For Adelaide it was a revelation, not only on the physical plane but also on the emotional one. She discovered a different Thaddeus, away from the constraints and expectations of his world, a man who laughed more easily, who spoke openly about his childhood dreams, who sometimes fell asleep in full sun on the beach, vulnerable and abandoned as she had never seen him. For Thaddeus, it was a rebirth. Each day spent with Adelaide erased a bit more of the scars left by years of solitude and mistrust. He was relearning to trust, to let go, to believe in the possibility of happiness without shadow. On the last evening of their stay, as they dined on the terrace under a sky strewn with stars, Thaddeus handed her a small velvet box. "It's not what you think," he said, seeing her eyes widen. "Not yet. It's a promise." Inside was a white gold bracelet, adorned with a single sapphire that recalled the color of the Oregon Sea. "So you'll always remember these days," he murmured, attaching the jewel to her wrist. "What we've been here, what we can be together." She caressed the sapphire with her fingertips, moved by this gesture and by all it represented. "I don't need a jewel to remember. These moments are engraved in me." "I know." He smiled, his eyes reflecting the candlelight. "But I wanted you to have something tangible, an anchor for when reality catches up with us." For they both knew that their Oregon idyll was coming to an end. That soon, they would have to return to Healdsburg, face again the looks, the judgments, the obligations. That their love, as solid as it was in the isolation of this house, would be tested by daily life and its countless challenges. The estate seemed more imposing than Adelaide remembered, its stone towers standing out against the autumn sky. After the sunny simplicity of Oregon, this return to the splendor of the Montgomery estate created a strange feeling in her, a mix of familiarity and foreignness. "Welcome home, Miss Adelaide," greeted Harrison the butler, with a formality tinged with sincere affection. In a few months she had earned the respect of the staff, not through authority, but through her natural kindness and her refusal of unnecessary privileges. Routine quickly reclaimed its rights. Thaddeus, despite his Oregon resolutions, was sucked into the urgencies that had accumulated during his absence. Adelaide's days, for their part, suddenly seemed strangely empty without her work at the library. One morning, as she was having coffee on the terrace, absently leafing through a magazine, she was struck by a disturbing realization. She no longer had her own identity. She had become Thaddeus Montgomery's companion, an appendage of his prestigious life, but had ceased to be Adelaide Clark, the literature enthusiast with modest but personal ambitions. This awareness deeply troubled her. She loved Thaddeus with all her soul, but could she be content to exist solely through him? Didn't she need a purpose, a project, a reason for being that belonged to her? That evening she broached the subject with him as they dined in the kitchen, an informal habit they had developed to escape the solemnity of the dining room. "I feel useless," she confessed, nervously playing with her wine glass. "You have your vines, your business, your responsibilities. I wait for you to come home." Thaddeus set down his fork, watching her carefully. "Do you regret leaving the library?" "No, I don't know," she sighed, searching for the right words. "I think I need to feel necessary, to contribute to something." "You are necessary to me," he responded gently. "That's not enough." The words came out harder than she had intended. "I love you, Thaddeus, but I can't build my entire existence around yours." A silence settled, heavy with unspoken words and worries. Adelaide feared she had hurt Thaddeus, but to her great surprise she saw a smile slowly form on his face. "I've been waiting for you to say that," he admitted. "I was wondering how long it would take you to realize that you deserve more than being simply my companion." The next day, he took her to visit a small stone building in the historic center of Healdsburg, just steps from the church. The place, once an antique shop, had been vacant for months. "What do you think?" he asked as she explored the space, admiring the exposed beams and the arched windows that let in a golden light. "It's magnificent, but why are you showing me this place?" "Because I think it would make a perfect specialized bookstore." He approached, visibly enthusiastic. "You told me once that your dream was to open a bookstore dedicated to rare books and rare editions. This place could be yours." Adelaide was speechless, touched that he remembered this confidence made months ago, during one of their first conversations at the town library. "I can't accept. It would be too—" "It's not a gift," he interrupted. "It's an investment. In your talent, in your passion. You'll manage this place as you see fit. You'll be the legal owner. I'll just be a silent investor." This proposal awakened in her an excitement she hadn't felt in a long time. Creating her own cultural space, sharing her passion for rare books, organizing readings and literary meetings. It was a dream she had almost forgotten in the whirlwind of her new life. Yet a doubt persisted. "People will say I got all this only thanks to you." "So what?" Thaddeus shrugged. "We both know that's not the case. You have the knowledge, the passion, the determination. Money is just a practical detail." The following weeks were dedicated to transforming the old shop into an elegant and welcoming bookstore. Adelaide invested heart and soul in this project, personally selecting each book, designing the interior, creating an atmosphere that would reflect her personality and vision. The opening of The Turned Page was a discreet but real success. The inhabitants of Healdsburg, initially skeptical, were won over by the authenticity of her approach and the quality of her selection. Little by little, the bookstore became a meeting place for literature lovers in the region, a space where Adelaide could fully express her passion and expertise. This new independence subtly transformed her relationship with Thaddeus. Their conversations were enriched by their separate experiences. Their evening reunions gained in intensity after days spent each in their own universe. However, despite this apparent new balance, a worry persisted in Adelaide's heart. As if such perfect happiness could only be temporary, as if something or someone would inevitably come to disturb this hard-won harmony. She didn't yet know how right her intuition was. The woman who pushed open the door of The Turned Page on a rainy Tuesday afternoon looked nothing like what Adelaide had imagined. Tall, elegant, with ash-blonde hair cut in a bob and glacier blue eyes, she exuded a quiet confidence that seemed almost insolent. "You're Adelaide Clark, aren't you?" she asked without preamble, removing her leather gloves with a precise gesture. Adelaide, who was arranging newly arrived books, felt a shiver run down her spine. She had never seen this woman, but something in her voice, in her posture, aroused a sense of alarm in her. "Yes, I am. How can I help you?" An enigmatic smile stretched the perfectly made-up lips of the stranger. "My name is Vivian Harrington, formerly Montgomery." Time seemed to freeze. Adelaide instinctively clutched the book she was holding against her chest, like a flimsy shield. Vivian, Thaddeus's ex-wife, the one who had left him, broken him, whose shadow still sometimes hovered over their moments of happiness. "I understand your surprise," continued Vivian. surveying the bookstore with genuine curiosity. "I would probably have the same reaction in your place. What do you want?" The question came out more abruptly than Adelaide would have liked, but the situation surpassed all her capacities for conventional politeness. "To talk to you. Simply to talk to you." Vivienne indicated the two armchairs installed near the window in the reading corner of the bookstore. "Can we sit for a moment?" As in a strange dream, Adelaide found herself seated across from the woman who had shared Thaddeus's life for nearly 10 years, who knew parts of him that she herself would never know. "I haven't come to cause problems," began Vivienne, elegantly crossing her legs. "On the contrary, I've come to congratulate you. To congratulate me for succeeding where I failed, for giving back to Thaddeus his capacity to love, to trust." A shadow passed over her perfect face. "It's no small feat, believe me." A silence settled, punctuated only by the ticking of the antique clock hanging on the wall and the distant sound of rain against the windows. "I left him for the wrong reasons," continued Vivienne, her gaze lost in the vague. "I was young, impatient, thirsty for experiences. Thaddeus was constant, solid. At the time, I confused this solidity with boredom." Adelaide listened, unable to interrupt this unexpected confession. "I remarried in Boston. I have 2 children now. A life that I love." A sincere smile softened her features. "But I've carried for years the weight of guilt, of knowing that I had hurt a good man, that I had perhaps destroyed his ability to love again." "Why tell me all this?" finally asked Adelaide, troubled by this sudden vulnerability. Vivienne looked her straight in the eyes. "Because I want to clean up the past, so Thaddeus can embrace the future without reservations. And that future is you, Adelaide." She took an envelope from her handbag and placed it gently on the low table between them. "This is a letter for Thaddeus. Apologies, explanations that I should have given him a long time ago. Could you give it to him?" Adelaide stared at the envelope, as if it were a potentially dangerous object. "Why not give it to him yourself?" "Because my presence might reawaken old wounds. Because this step is not selfish. I'm not seeking forgiveness to ease my conscience. I sincerely want him to be happy." She hesitated, then added, "With you." When Vivienne left the bookstore a few minutes later, Adelaide remained motionless, the envelope placed before her like a fragile bridge between the past and the future. Should she give it to Thaddeus? Risk awakening painful memories in the name of a hypothetical emotional liberation? That night, she didn't mention Vivienne's visit. Watching Thaddeus working in his study, focused on export contracts, she wondered if he sometimes thought of his ex-wife, if he unconsciously compared Adelaide to her, if he still feared deep down being abandoned a second time. It was only 3 days later, during a walk in the estate gardens, that she found the courage to tell him about this encounter and to hand him the envelope. Thaddeus took it without a word, his face suddenly closed, impenetrable. He put it in his jacket pocket without opening it. "Aren't you curious to know what it contains?" Adelaide asked gently. "No." His answer was clear, final. "What Vivienne might have to say to me today no longer matters." "It could help you." "I don't know." "Make peace with the past?" He stopped, taking her hands in his. "Adelaide, listen to me carefully. My past with Vivienne belongs to another time, another life. The only thing that matters to me now is our future. Together." That night, however, as she pretended to sleep, she felt him silently rise. Through her half-closed eyelids, she saw him take the envelope from his jacket and head toward his study. The door closed softly behind him. Adelaide remained awake for a long time, listening to the silence of the night, imagining Thaddeus reading Vivienne's words, confronting emotions he had perhaps buried for years. Part of her feared that this letter would reawaken old feelings. Another hoped it would bring the healing that Vivienne had evoked. When he returned to bed much later, she sensed that he was different, not more distant, no, rather as if an invisible weight had been lifted from his shoulders. He drew her to him with a new tenderness, burying his face in her hair. "Thank you," he murmured in the darkness. "For what?" "For giving me this letter, for understanding that I needed it, even if I didn't know it myself." In the days that followed, Adelaide felt a subtle change in Thaddeus, as if the last chains that bound him to the past had finally broken, allowing him to be fully present in their story. However, while one obstacle seemed overcome, A new challenge was already looming on the horizon, ready to test the solidity of their common foundations. The news came one November morning, as the estate was adorned with the flaming colors of autumn. Thaddeus received a call that made him instantly pale. He isolated himself in his study for hours, chaining telephone conversations, his voice sometimes controlled, sometimes vibrant with contained anger. When he finally emerged, his face bore the marks of a fatigue that even the most skillful social mask could not conceal. "What's happening?" asked Adelaide, concerned to see him like this. He collapsed in an armchair, passing a hand over his face. "An investment has collapsed. A vineyard project in New Zealand. I committed substantial sums. Too substantial. How serious is it?" He looked up at her with a gaze that revealed a vulnerability he rarely showed. "Enough to threaten a significant part of our production here. The banks are talking about recalling certain loans. If they do, we could lose the southern parcels, the ones that produce our best wine." This revelation hit Adelaide like a physical blow. She knew that these lands represented far more than a financial asset for Thaddeus. They were the legacy he had built from nothing, the tangible symbol of his rise from the modest streets of Healdsburg to the summit of the American wine world. The following days were tense, punctuated by meetings with bankers, lawyers, accountants. Thaddeus spent his nights searching for solutions, alternatives, ways to save what he had spent a lifetime building. Adelaide felt helpless in the face of this financial storm, whose complex mechanisms she barely understood. This world of figures, contracts, and high-tension negotiations seemed inaccessible to her, and for the first time in a long time, she painfully felt the gap between their respective universes. One evening, while Thaddeus was in San Francisco for a final attempt at negotiation with his creditors, she sat alone in the estate's library. The rare editions of Hemingway and Fitzgerald seemed to look at her in silence, mute witnesses to her inner torment. An idea had been germinating in her for days, perhaps a crazy idea, but one that continued to impose itself as an evidence. She knew what she had to do. The next day she went to the bank in Healdsburg, where she had opened her first account at the age of 16. The manager received her with polite curiosity. Thaddeus Montgomery's companion deserved this attention, even if she was the little librarian he had watched grow up. "I'd like to withdraw all my savings," she announced, without preamble. The man looked at her over his glasses, surprised. "All your savings, Miss Clark? It's a considerable sum for a cash withdrawal. May I ask the reason for this sudden need?" "Personal reasons," she replied simply. These savings represented 8 years of hard work, privations and meticulous saving. The money she had set aside to one day buy a small house in the surroundings of Healdsburg, to have a place truly her own, a security that no one could take away from her. When Thaddeus returned from San Francisco that evening, dejection was written on his features. The meeting had not brought the hoped-for results. The banks remained inflexible. "We have 3 weeks to find a solution," he said in a tired voice. "After that, the procedures will begin." Adelaide sat across from him, her face unusually solemn. Without a word, she placed a thick envelope on the table. "What's this?" he asked, intrigued. "Open it." Inside was a considerable sum of money, not enough to solve all the problems, but sufficient to gain precious time, to serve as a temporary guarantee with the most pressing creditors. "Adelaide!" His face expressed a mixture of astonishment and incredulity. I can't accept." "It's not a gift," she said firmly. "It's an investment in our common future. But it's all your savings, your house project." She took his hands in hers, feeling their slight trembling. "Thaddeus, you've offered me a home, not just a roof or walls, but a true home. This money is worth nothing compared to what we're building together." Thaddeus stared at her for a long time, and for the first time since she had known him, Adelaide saw tears shining in his grey eyes. Not tears of despair or gratitude, but something deeper, the absolute recognition of having found, after so many years of distrustful solitude, a true companion for all the seasons of life. "No one has ever," he began, his voice hoarse with emotion. She placed a finger on his lips. "I know." That night, their love took on a new dimension, not the passionate abandon of their Oregon nights, nor the intimate tenderness of their evenings at the estate, but a communion that transcended words, bodies, time itself. Adelaide's gesture had not only provided a temporary financial respite, it had proven beyond any possible doubt that her feelings completely transcended material questions. this fear that had haunted Thaddeus since the beginning of their relationship. However, while this crisis seemed to have brought them closer, a new trial was already preparing, a trial that would test not their commitment to each other, but their common vision of the future. Spring was timidly announcing itself on the Montgomery estate. The first green shoots appeared on the vine stems, a promise of renewal after the rigorous winter they had just weathered, both literally and metaphorically. The financial crisis had been overcome, not without sacrifices. Thaddeus had had to sell some secondary assets, renegotiate contracts, but the historic parcels of the estate had been preserved. Adelaide's intervention had acted as a catalyst, giving Thaddeus the necessary time to restructure his finances and save the legacy he had built. Adelaide, for her part, had transformed her bookstore into a true cultural center of Healdsburg. Beyond rare books, she now organized readings, meetings with authors, writing workshops for children in the region. The Turned Page had become a vibrant place, recognized well beyond the borders of Sonoma County. That morning, Adelaide woke up with a strange sensation, a slight nausea, a vertigo when she stood up. She ignored it, attributing it to the accumulated fatigue of the past few weeks. But when the same discomfort repeated itself in the following days, accompanied by an unusual sensitivity and an inexplicable fatigue, an idea began to germinate in her mind. It couldn't be, or could it? Without saying anything to Thaddeus, she made an appointment with a doctor in Santa Rosa. Preferring the discretion of a larger city to the inevitable gossip that would have spread in Healdsburg if she had consulted there. The diagnosis confirmed her suspicions. She was almost 8 weeks pregnant. At 22, she would give Thaddeus the child he had always dreamed of, but had never believed possible at this stage of his life. On the train that brought her back to Healdsburg, Adelaide contemplated the landscape passing by, lost in her thoughts. How to announce this news to Thaddeus? Would he be happy, worried, or both? And herself, was she ready to become a mother so young to assume this immense responsibility? She finally decided to organize a special dinner at the estate. She spent the afternoon preparing Thaddeus's favorite dishes with the discreet help of the cook, set the table in the small winter dining room, with candles and Thaddeus's favorite flowers, old roses from the garden. When he returned that evening, tired after a long day of negotiations with American distributors, surprise was evident on his face. "What's all this?" he asked, a curious smile on his lips. "A special evening, just for us." The dinner unfolded in a relaxed atmosphere, Adelaide listening to Thaddeus recount his day, sharing the latest news from the bookstore. It was only at dessert, a garden strawberry tart, that she finally found the courage to speak. "I have something to tell you," she began, her voice slightly trembling despite all her efforts to appear calm. Thaddeus set down his fork, suddenly attentive to the change in her tone. "I'm listening." She took a deep breath. "I'm pregnant." Time seemed to stop. Thaddeus remained perfectly still, his face fixed in an indecipherable expression. Then slowly his eyes lit up with a light she had never seen before, a mixture of pure joy, incredulity, and an emotion so deep that it seemed to transform him from within. We're going to—" He seemed unable to formulate a complete sentence. She nodded, her own eyes filling with tears. "Yes, we're going to have a baby." In an instant, he was by her side, kneeling near her chair, taking her hands in his. "Adelaide," his voice was hoarse with emotion. "It's the most beautiful gift you could give me." That evening, lying in their bed, Thaddeus gently placed his hand on Adelaide's still flat stomach, as if he feared breaking something infinitely precious. "I'm 46 years old," he murmured in the darkness. "I'll be an old father." She turned her face toward him, caressing his rough cheek. "You'll be a wonderful father, experienced, patient, wise." "I'm afraid," he confessed, with disarming honesty. Her afraid of not being up to it, of not having enough energy, of not being there long enough. Adelaide immediately understood his deepest fear, that of one day leaving a child without a father, too soon, because of their age difference. Our child will have the fortune of having a father who has lived, who has weathered storms and remained standing. A man who will know how to transmit not only a name or a legacy, but a vision of the world, an ethic, an inner strength. She took his hand, squeezing it with conviction. "And you will be there, Thaddeus. We will be there, together." to see him grow. In the weeks that followed, the estate seemed to come alive with a new energy. An unused room on the first floor was transformed into a nursery, the walls repainted in soft tones, antique furniture lovingly restored. What struck Adelaide most was the change that occurred in Thaddeus. This man, usually so focused on his work, now spent hours reading books on parenting, discussing potential names, planning the future of this child, who was still just a promise. The age difference, which had concerned them so much at the beginning of their relationship, now seemed to have become the strength of their couple. Thaddeus's maturity perfectly complemented Adelaide's vitality, creating a perfect balance between wisdom and youthful enthusiasm. What had been perceived as an obstacle was now a precious advantage for the unborn child. One evening, as they talked in the garden, watching the sun set over the vineyards, Thaddeus made an unexpected proposal. "Marry me," he said simply. "Not for the baby, but for us, because I can no longer imagine my life without you." His proposal had nothing grandiose or theatrical, just these simple words, pronounced with absolute sincerity. And it was precisely this simplicity that touched Adelaide deeply. "Yes," she replied without hesitation. "For us." They had chosen simplicity, not a grand, lavish wedding, as might have been expected from the owner of one of the region's most prestigious wineries, not a sumptuous reception with hundreds of guests. Just an intimate ceremony at the Healdsburg Church, the very place where their paths had first crossed during that charity gala that now seemed to belong to another life. The church, with its ochre stones warmed by the June sun, its stained glass projecting multicolored shards onto the stone floor, welcomed a restricted assembly, but one carefully chosen, the faithful friends who had supported their relationship from the beginning, some members of the estate staff who had become almost family, Adelaide's mother who, despite her initial reluctance, had finally accepted this improbable son-in-law. Callum was there too, surprisingly sober and respectful. The financial crisis and the way Adelaide had supported his brother seemed to have modified his perception of the young woman. He remained distant, but his hostility had transformed into a form of reluctant respect. Adelaide had chosen a simple dress, empire cut, that elegantly concealed her slightly rounded belly of 4 months of pregnancy. Her auburn hair was adorned with a crown of fresh flowers, the same old roses, jasmine, and geraniums that Thaddeus cultivated in his secret garden in memory of his mother. When she walked up the central aisle on her uncle's arm, her father having died when she was a child, the gazes no longer expressed the unhealthy curiosity or judgment of the early days, but a sincere emotion at the evidence of this love that had overcome so many obstacles. Thaddeus awaited her before the altar, elegant in his dark suit, his eyes not leaving hers as she advanced toward him. In that gaze, she could read their entire story, the doubts, the struggles, the victories, and above all, this quiet certainty of having found, against all odds, exactly the person who made his soul complete. "We are gathered here today," began the minister, but Adelaide barely heard his words. She was entirely absorbed by Thaddeus's presence, by the warmth of his hand holding hers, by this deep connection that seemed to transcend words, rituals, time itself. When they exchanged their vows, their voices were clear and assured, carrying in the silent church the promise of a love that feared neither external judgments nor differences in age, class, or experience. "I promise to love and cherish you, in joy as in adversity, in wealth as in poverty, in health as in sickness, all the days of our life," said Thaddeus, his voice resonating with a sincerity that moved to tears even the most skeptical of the guests. When the minister declared them husband and wife, and their lips met in that first official kiss, Adelaide had the strange sensation that something had come full circle, as if this moment had always been destined to exist, as if all the trials, all the doubts had been only the necessary steps to arrive at this momentary perfection. The reception took place in the gardens of the estate, under large white tents installed among the flowering rose bushes. The tables were decorated with simplicity but elegance, white linen tablecloths, bouquets of wildflowers, candles in blown glass holders. As the sun began to set, tinting the sky with pink and golden hues, Thaddeus discreetly drew Adelaide away from the festivities. Hand in hand, they walked to a small promontory that offered a breathtaking view of the vineyards stretching as far as the eye could see. "I wanted to show you something," he said softly. With a gesture, he indicated a vineyard plot in the distance, different from the others. The vines there were younger, planted in perfect rows that seemed to shine with a more vivid green in the evening light. "It's our plot," he explained. "I planted it the day you announced your pregnancy. These vines will grow along with our child. In 20 years, they will produce their first great vintage, just in time to celebrate his or her passage into adulthood." Moved beyond words, Adelaide could only squeeze his hand more tightly, feeling tears rise to her eyes. "I've spent my life building, acquiring, preserving," continued Thaddeus, his voice tinged with a new gravity. "But for the first time, I'm planting for a future that I may not see completely. These vines are my promise for our child, for our family. No matter what happens, a part of me, of us, will continue to grow here." In this simple but deeply symbolic gesture, Adelaide recognized Thaddeus's ultimate transformation. From the wounded and distrustful man he had become after his first romantic disappointment, to this being capable of projecting beyond himself, of investing without guarantee in a future he hoped for but could not control. As they rejoined their guests hand in hand, Adelaide realized that they were not just lovers or spouses, but truly best friends who had found in the other the half that completed their souls, proving that true love knows no barriers of age, social class, or any other convention that society tries to impose. Autumn had arrived at the Montgomery estate, adorning the vines with flamboyant tints before their winter rest. In the mansion, an atmosphere of feverish anticipation reigned. The term of Adelaide's pregnancy was approaching, transforming each day into a mixture of excitement and apprehension. Thaddeus, usually so self-possessed, displayed a touching nervousness. He had arranged for a room next to the nursery so that a midwife could stay at the estate for the last weeks. Renowned doctors from San Francisco were on alert, ready to intervene at the slightest sign. "You're transforming our home into a hospital," Adelaide gently teased him, amused by his meticulous preparations. "I just want everything to be perfect," he responded, checking for the umpteenth time the contents of the bag prepared for the maternity ward. She observed him with tenderness, touched by this vulnerability he showed only to her. This man who directed a wine empire with assurance, who made decisions involving millions of dollars without blinking, found himself disarmed in the face of the imminence of this new life they had created together. The bookstore continued to thrive under the temporary direction of Olivia, Adelaide's faithful friend, who had agreed to take the reins during her maternity leave. The Turned Page had become an essential place in Healdsburg's cultural life, now attracting authors and readers from all over the region. As for the Montgomery vineyards, they were experiencing a remarkable renewal. Having overcome the financial crisis, Thaddeus had reoriented his strategy, focusing on quality rather than expansion, favoring traditional methods and respect for terroir. This approach, combined with exceptional weather conditions, promised an exceptional vintage, the first since their marriage. One late October morning, as the first lights of dawn barely tinged the sky, Adelaide was awakened by a dull pain in her lower back. At first diffuse, then increasingly precise, spreading like a wave to her belly. "Thaddeus," she murmured, gently shaking her sleeping husband. "I think it's time." The hours that followed unfolded in a strange mixture of crystalline clarity and emotional fog. The arrival of the midwife, the calm but efficient preparations, then this ancient dance of life seeking to emerge, rhythmed by pain, determination, and a strength that Adelaide didn't suspect she possessed. Thaddeus remained by her side, unwavering, his apparent calm belying the storm of emotions raging within him. He whispered encouragements to her, wiped the sweat from her brow, endured without flinching her fingers gripping his with an almost desperate force during the most violent contractions. And then, after what seemed to be both an eternity and an instant, the first cry, fragile, indignant, perfect. A little girl with lungs visibly in perfect working order, with tiny fists clenched as if she were already ready to fight the whole world. "Victoria," murmured Adelaide, exhausted but radiant, as the midwife placed the newborn on her chest. "Her name will be Victoria." Thaddeus, his eyes shining with restrained tears, approved with a nod, unable to speak, so much emotion constricted his throat. This name, chosen together months before now, took on its full meaning. Victory over prejudices, over doubts, over the obstacles that had marked their path. The days following Victoria's birth transformed the mansion. Rooms once formal and imposing softened, animated by the baby's coos, by the comings and goings of visitors coming to pay their respects to the new Montgomery heir, by that indescribable atmosphere that only the presence of a new life can create. Callum himself, who had come specially from San Francisco for the occasion, seemed touched by the little girl. Awkwardly holding his niece in his arms, he showed a face that no one, not even Thaddeus, knew he possessed. Vulnerable, almost tender. "She has your eyes," he said to his brother. "And her intelligence," he added, looking at Adelaide with what almost resembled respect. One evening, as Victoria slept peacefully in her crib, Thaddeus joined Adelaide in their bedroom. He held a midnight blue velvet box that she immediately recognized, the same that had contained the bracelet offered in Oregon. "I have something for you. For both of you, actually." Inside was an antique ring, with a sapphire surrounded by small diamonds. A family heirloom that had been waiting for generations. "It's not simply a ring," explained Thaddeus as he slipped it onto Adelaide's finger. "It's the symbol of a legacy, of a continuity. My grandmother wore it all her life, then passed it to my mother, who made me promise to give it only to the woman who would be truly worthy of wearing it, to she who would give a new breath to our family." Adelaide contemplated the jewel in the soft light of the bedside lamp. The facets of the sapphire seemed to contain unfathomable depths, like the history of this family she had entered, not by calculation or chance, but through the force of a love that had defied all probabilities. "I've always been afraid that our age difference would be a problem," admitted Thaddeus, sitting near her on the edge of the bed. "That you would end up regretting having chosen a man who will age before you, who will perhaps leave you too soon." She placed a finger on his lips, gently interrupting him. "Our age difference has never been a problem. It's our strength. Your maturity complements my youth. Your experience balances my enthusiasm. We are exactly what the other needs." That night, held close together, listening to the regular breathing of their daughter in the nearby crib, they savored this moment of domestic perfection, this peace hard-won after so many storms. However, even in this seemingly shadowless happiness, Adelaide sensed in Thaddeus a residual unease, as if a part of him still didn't dare to fully believe in the durability of their happiness. As if he were waiting, in spite of himself, for fate to come and claim its due for so much felicity. She didn't yet know that the true test of their love, the ultimate proof that would confirm the unshakable solidity of their bonds, awaited them just around the corner. 5 years had passed since Victoria's birth. The Montgomery estate, once imposing and somewhat austere, had transformed into a place vibrant with life and a child's laughter. The corridors that had resonated for decades with only the measured steps of Thaddeus and his staff now echoed with the unbridled races of a little girl with auburn curls and a determined character. Victoria Montgomery, at 5 years old, was the perfect blend of her parents. Adelaide's vivid intelligence and insatiable curiosity combined with Thaddeus's quiet determination and sense of observation. She spent her days between the mansion's library, where she already read books well above her age, and the vineyards, where she followed her father like a shadow, asking 1,000 questions about every aspect of viticulture. On that spring morning, as the first flowers began to bloom in the gardens of the estate, Adelaide watched her daughter and her husband from the terrace. Thaddeus was patiently showing Victoria how to recognize promising buds on the vine stems. His hair, now almost entirely grey, contrasted with his daughter's flaming curls, but their concentrated expressions were identical. Life had taken a rhythm, both predictable and wonderfully satisfying. The Turned Page bookstore had multiplied. A second establishment had opened in San Francisco, specializing in antique works on wine and gastronomy. Adelaide divided her time between managing these two cultural spaces and her family life, finding in this balance a fullness she would never have imagined a few years earlier. As for Thaddeus, he had progressively delegated part of the daily management of the vineyards to a trusted team, focusing on the creative and strategic aspects that truly passionate him. This reorganization allowed him to spend more time with his family, to savor these precious years when Victoria was building herself day by day. The third major turning point in their story had occurred gradually, almost imperceptibly. They had realized they were not just lovers or spouses, but truly best friends who had found in the other the half that completed their souls. This deep friendship, this absolute complicity that transcended even their passionate love, had become the unshakable foundation of their relationship. That evening, after putting Victoria to bed, who demanded, as every evening, the story of the champagne-stained dress, Thaddeus and Adelaide settled on the terrace. The twilight was gently enveloping the vineyards in a golden light, and in the distance they could glimpse the lights of Healdsburg beginning to twinkle. "Do you know what day it is today?" asked Thaddeus, serving 2 glasses of an amber wine with golden reflections. Adelaide smiled, taking the glass he held out to her. "How could I forget? It's the anniversary of our meeting. 6 years, day for day." He raised his glass. 6 years since you tripped on that marble staircase and spilled your champagne. The most beautiful accident of my entire life." They toasted in silence, savoring this special wine, the first vintage produced after their marriage, bottled the year of Victoria's birth. Each sip seemed to contain the essence of their common story, both powerful and delicate, complex and harmonious. "I have something to tell you," began Adelaide, a mysterious light in her gaze. Thaddeus looked at her attentively, recognizing this particular expression she had when she was about to share important news. "The Montgomery family will be expanding," she announced simply, "in about 7 months." Thaddeus's face lit up with a pure joy, without shadow. At 52, the idea of becoming a father again might have frightened him, but these years with Adelaide and Victoria had taught him that age was just a number without importance in the face of true love. "A little brother or sister for Victoria," he murmured, moved. "She'll be overjoyed." "I think she already suspects it," replied Adelaide with a knowing smile. "She asked me yesterday why my belly was making a little bump like the moon. That child misses nothing, like her mother." They remained like this for a long time, savoring the sweetness of the moment, the simple perfection of this happiness built day after day, obstacle after obstacle. The stars progressively appeared in the sky, like so many silent witnesses to this improbable love story that had defied all conventions. "You know," finally said Thaddeus, "sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't been at the top of that staircase that evening, if you hadn't tripped, if our gazes had never met." Adelaide smiled, squeezing his hand in hers. "I believe we would have found each other anyway, one way or another. Some souls are destined to meet, whatever path they must travel to get there." He looked at her for a long time, admiring the wisdom that shone in her eyes, a wisdom that had nothing to do with age, but everything to do with depth of soul, with this rare ability to see beyond appearances, to grasp the very essence of things. "I love you, Adelaide Montgomery," he said simply. "Each day a bit more than yesterday, a bit less than tomorrow." She nestled against him, feeling the warmth of his body against hers, listening to the regular beating of his heart. "And I love you, Thaddeus Montgomery, for all that you are, for all that we are together." In the distance, the last ray of sunlight disappeared behind the hills, giving way to a starry night that enveloped the estate in its deep peace. In this home that had known so many dramas, joys, transformations, a family slept peacefully, anchored in the certainty that true love, the kind that transcends age, conventions, and fears, is the most powerful force in the universe, because sometimes the most beautiful fairy tales begin when least expected, with a champagne-stained dress and a heart willing to believe in the impossible.